Spider-Man No Way Home comes out this Friday. It's my most anticipated movie since Avengers Endgame. Let's just say I'll be thrilled if certain people show up and angrier than I was at the end of another big blockbuster movie if they don't. Now, I've talked about every Spider-Man movie on this channel since its creation in 2016, except for two. That's right, the Amazing Spider-Man movies from 2012 and 2014. Two movies that actually did pretty good at the box office, combining for $1.4 billion. And yet, we never got a third movie, not even spin-offs or a Sinister Six movie the first two movies teased. So what happened? Why are these movies considered so bad? And why did we never get more Amazing Spider-Man sequels? Well, let's go back 9.5 years ago to the release of The Amazing Spider-Man. When this movie came out, my initial thought was, where the is Spider-Man 4? So I didn't watch it for a while. Summer 2013 was actually the first time I saw it and felt that it was pretty alright. Nothing remarkable, and after rewatching it for the first time in years, yeah, I feel exactly the same. The opening 45 minutes is very slow. Spider-Man's suit is too dark and looks like something I'd purchased from Dick's Sporting Goods. The screenplay feels way too similar to Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man movie. Everything, especially Uncle Ben's death, is oddly executed. It's almost like they were afraid to tell an original story, but didn't want to lean too heavily on the first movie. And the villain isn't great at all. Curtis Connors, similar to the Green Goblin and Doc Ock, isn't a bad guy. His mind has just been tampered by his experiments, but he's not menacing, and I never get a sense that this guy is truly evil. I don't even know why he wants to turn the entire city into lizards. If anything, he should have just taken out Irfan Khan's character for shutting down his experiment, and that be that. There's absolutely no reason for him to harm everyone in the city. However, I will say that the cast and performances in this first movie are really good. Andrew Garfield gives a performance that deserves a better movie. Emma Stone, Martin Sheen, Dennis Leary, and Sally Field are all really good too. Each give raw emotional performances that feel realistic, and for that reason, I like the main characters in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. Plus, the visual effects are stunning, but everything else either feels too much like Raimi's first Spider-Man movie, and it's oddly executed, or feels mindless, whether it's during some of the movie's slowest scenes in the beginning, or during its action sequences. And it wraps up in such an odd place. After Captain Stacy's death, Peter breaks up with Gwen because her father didn't want her to be involved with Peter as long as he's Spider-Man, but then the movie kind of teases they're getting back together only 5 minutes later. I don't know, it's really weird. On to the sequel. Oh god. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is an awful sequel. It's the worst Spider-Man movie ever made, and the more I watch it, the more I dislike it. I will say one big improvement over the first movie is that the sequel is very colorful. It's exactly how a Spider-Man movie should look. It shouldn't look dull and dreary, it should be more bright and fun. And that's how this movie feels right out of the gate, except The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is kind of like a comedy. The whole thing is just one big prank. It's almost as if at the end, Sony intended to put "got ya" during the credits. Seriously, where do I begin? Upon my first viewing nearly 6 years ago, I called The Amazing Spider-Man 2 entertaining. Actually, I was very pleasantly entertained. But when I watched it again, it wasn't exciting entertainment anymore. No, this time it was comedic entertainment. Thanks for the quips, Paul Giamatti. You were great. Aside from Rhino, I laugh hysterically every time now at Dane DeHaan's portrayal of Harry Osborn. He's an actor who I think is very talented and that I admire, but this performance is a career worst.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
It's kind of like Hayden Christensen in Attack of the Clones. The writing is dreadful, and it's not really his fault. Sony just rushed the entire movie because they thought they were heading towards a universe of their own. Little did they know that this would be the end of that. Jamie Foxx as Electro, I think, was one of the reasons why I was entertained by this movie on first viewing. He's an innocent guy, overall a nice person, doesn't have any friends it seems. He literally gets and ends up with cool powers. Why he's after Spider-Man though is beyond me. If anything, he should take down Oscorp. They're the ones who treated him terribly, not Spider-Man. In fact, he saved them earlier in the movie. So when it comes to the movie's 3 villains, it gets like a 0.5 out of 3. Something else that really bugs me about this movie is how unfocused it is. Please explain to me, what's the main plot of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Of course, 2 of the main plot points involve Electro and Goblin, but there's also the subplot returning from the first movie about the disappearance of Peter's parents. It's extremely convoluted for no reason and never gets resolved. Oh, just like Uncle Ben's story in the first movie. There's also another story between Peter and Gwen. They break up and get back together a billion times in this one, and she's apparently moving to England. It's just really dumb. And I love how convenient it is the 2 times Gwen rides in Oscorp's elevators in this movie. She just so happens to share it with the 2 main villains, and just them. The only saving grace of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the final 15 or so minutes. Gwen Stacy's death is quite surprising, and I totally buy Garfield's reaction during the sequence. Overall, I just really like how Peter stops being Spider-Man for a while before eventually returning as a web-slinger in the final scene. It's a pretty freaking epic final shot. So, these movies weren't great. Not even close. As much as I love Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Sally Field, Dennis Leary, and Martin Sheen in this franchise, it's not enough. None of it is their fault. It's completely on the studio Sony. And this happens all the time nowadays. Just look at Disney, Warner Bros., even companies like Viacom, Comcast, who owns NBC Universal, and I would not be surprised if the same happens eventually to MGM, now owned by Amazon, who owns the James Bond franchise. Oh great. So a big part as to why these movies failed is because they were bad, especially the sequel, but there's a little more to the story than you might think. I guess Sony thought The Amazing Spider-Man 2 would do wonders at the box office, but that wasn't at all the case. Sure, it still did well, but $709 million is still low for the Spider-Man franchise. It's the lowest at the box office for a live-action Spider-Man movie to date. That immediately told Sony this is not working. If we make a third movie, there's a chance the box office could be even lower, somewhere in the $600, maybe even $500 million range. And for a character like Spider-Man, that's not going to cut it. Before The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony had this big universe planned, and after its release, they abandoned ship. Originally, it was Sony's idea to compete with the MCU. That was their first big mistake though. Never try to compete with an already massive franchise. Don't make something impossible your goal. Aim smaller, and maybe one day the popularity will grow so much that all kind of moviegoers will start gravitating towards your product. And absolutely never compete with a franchise that hasn't reached its peak yet. So you all know the rest. Sony struck a deal with Disney, bringing Spider-Man on board the MCU Express, and the train hasn't stopped since. Sony is making more money than they did with the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, and they're still building a little universe of their own on the side with movies like Venom and Morbius. And there you have it. The failure of that was the Amazing Spider-Man franchise eventually made Sony tons of cash because they joined forces with the juggernaut known as the MCU. Not compete with them. Always go where the money is, kids. Okay, quick bonus section to this video. I'm going to give a couple of quick No Way Home predictions. The movie is almost out and I really want to talk about a couple of things, so here are 3 predictions I have for the movie. Number 1, the villains are all variants. There is no other explanation for how or why these villains are all still alive and why some of them have different gear and completely different costumes altogether. It's the only thing that makes sense in my mind. Number 2, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield show up for a tiny bit at the movie's finale. Based off the trailer, I think Andrew and Tobey will come in last minute to help Tom save the day. Whether they are variants will be unknown, but because of that trailer, it's the only logical thing I see happening here. Like, how is Tom Holland's Spider-Man going to defeat 5 villains all by himself with just the help of Doctor Strange? So the way I see it playing out is that Tobey and Andrew appear in the final 15 to 20 minutes to help Tom, maybe even Daredevil Daredevil shows up in that final time span too to help even the playing field. And number 3, Venom will appear at first as a villain to complete the Sinister Six, but soon helps Peter in the fight against the villains too. Actually, I could see the same thing happening for Doc Ock at the end of this movie too. As we all know, during the finale of Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock came back to his senses and helped Peter save the day. And the reason why I think this version of Venom will appear in No Way Home as a good guy is because, well, first and foremost, they've got to address Venom 2's end credits scene. They can't just leave it like that. We cannot wait a couple of years to see why Tom Hardy's Venom ended up in the same universe as Tom Holland's Spider-Man. There's also this picture of Tom Hardy wearing a No Way Home hat. Also, if you've seen the Venom movies, you know that Venom is actually the good guy in both of them, so why would they all of a sudden make him a villain? I know the character is supposed to be a bad guy. He was very evil in Spider-Man 3, but I think this version of Venom is supposed to be the good version of Venom, whereas maybe later on we'll see a really evil version of Venom appear in Tom Holland's Spider-Man universe. These are all shots in the dark. I've heard tons of fan theories. Some people are saying that Tobey Maguire might appear as Uncle Ben. I hope that doesn't happen. I want to see him return again as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. That's all I want from him. And even though I don't like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies, I would love to see him return again as Peter Parker as well, because he was one of the best parts of those movies. Of course though, guys, I want to hear all of your thoughts. Why, in your opinion, do you think the Amazing Spider-Man franchise failed? Are you disappointed you never got to see a Sinister Six movie from the Amazing Spider-Man franchise? I kind of wish we saw it just because I'm really curious how it would have played out. Also, what are your No Way Home theories, and do you think there's a chance that my predictions could come true? Let me know down below in the comments section, guys. And as always, if you are new to my channel, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.